All right, let's talk about something that could fundamentally change how you look at massive projects. We're going to explore a huge shift in thinking, moving away from just calculating risk and into a world where we actively build a strategy to master it. This is a whole new playbook.
It's the big, scary question, isn't it? We see these multi-billion-dollar projects, airports, power plants, transit systems, and the stakes are just astronomical. Yet, so many of them run over budget, blow past their deadlines, or sometimes just completely fall apart. So what is going on?
And the answer, believe it or not, is both simple and profound. The reason so many of these giants stumble is because they're playing by an old set of rules. They treat risk like it's just a number, a probability you plug into a spreadsheet. But the truth is, risk is way more complex, and if you know what you're doing, it's also way more manageable.
So here's our game plan for today. We'll start by looking at risk in a new light. Then we'll map out the risk landscape. After that, we'll get into a four-part strategy, figure out who should be carrying which risks, and finally, talk about what it really means to be a risk strategist.
All right, first up, we've got to tackle the biggest piece of the puzzle, the mindset shift. This is all about going from being a passive number cruncher who just accepts the odds to becoming an active strategist who actually works to change them.
Now check this out, because this contrast is everything. The old way, what the book calls decisioneering, it's basically like being a gambler. You look at the odds, you place your bet on what looks like the best option, and you just hope it works out. But the new way, the managerial approach, says the future isn't set in stone. It's not about just picking the winner, it's about shaping your project to make it the winner. You're not just playing the game anymore, you're actually influencing the rules.
Okay, so if we're going to be strategists, we need a much better map of the territory. This means we have to understand the landscape of risk in a more sophisticated way, because, as you're about to see, not all risks are created equal, and they definitely don't stand still.
And this visual just nails the point. Risk isn't one single thing. Look here, an offshore oil platform. Incredibly risky technically, right? But since everyone wants the oil, the institutional risk, from regulators or public pushback, is actually pretty low. Now flip that. Look at an urban transport project. The tech is probably simple, but the institutional risks from politics, community groups, and all that red tape, they can be absolutely massive.
And on top of that, risk is a moving target. This chart shows the real-life journey of a project. You can see the technical risk starts out low and pretty much disappears after construction. But whoa, look what happens to the institutional and political risk right around 1990. There's this huge, sudden spike. That's what happens when new partners get involved or regulations change overnight. You can't just measure risk once and forget about it. You have to be managing it constantly.
So we've got a new way of thinking and a better map. But what do we actually do? Well, this next part is the playbook, a clear, practical framework for how to respond to pretty much any risk you'll ever face.
Here it is, the core of the entire framework, and it's just a simple grid built on two really powerful questions. First, along the bottom, how much control do we have over this risk, high or low? And second, on the side, is this risk specific to our project, or is it a broad, systemic risk that affects everybody, like interest rates or global events? Just by asking those two questions, you can classify any risk and know exactly how to deal with it.
Let's start in the bottom left. These are risks that are specific to your project, and you have a high degree of control over them. Think about things like your construction schedule or your internal team's performance. The strategy here is direct. You shape the risk and you actively mitigate it. This is your home turf. You take direct action. Okay, now let's look at the bottom right. These risks are still specific to your project, but you have low control. Maybe it's the performance of a key supplier or waiting on a permit from a government agency. The strategy here isn't to just accept it. Nope, you strategically shift it. You use contracts, insurance, or partnerships to hand that risk off to someone who's in a better position to manage it. Moving up to the top left, we find broad, systemic risks, but where you still have some control. Think about being too dependent on a single market. You can't control the market itself, but you can control your exposure to it. So the strategy is to diversify. It's the old saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket. You build a portfolio of projects or you serve different markets to soften the blow if one of them takes a hit. And finally, the top right. This is the big stuff. Systemic risks that are totally outside of anyone's control, like a global financial crisis or a major political upheaval. You can't shape them, you can't shift them, you can't really diversify them away. This is the residual risk of simply being in business. And the strategy here? You embrace it. This is the risk you get paid to take. It's the fundamental uncertainty that creates the opportunity for real returns.
Now, sitting right at the center of this whole matrix is a crucial tool: influence. For all those murky, hard-to-define risks, especially the institutional ones, the only way to gain control isn't through a spreadsheet. It's through negotiation, communication, and building relationships. It's about actively working to transform the risk itself.
So here you have it, the complete playbook. You shape and mitigate what you can control. You shift what you can't. You diversify your exposure to the big stuff, and you embrace the fundamental risk that you're paid to take. This is your new strategic map for navigating any project's uncertainty.
Now, we just mentioned shifting risk, and that leads to a really critical question. Who exactly are you supposed to shift it to? It's not about just dumping it on someone else's plate. It's about a really smart, strategic allocation based on a powerful economic idea.
And this image explains that idea perfectly. Think of all the partners on a major project. You've got local players, global banks, portfolio investors, and they all have different superpowers. Some are amazing at influencing local politics, others are great at absorbing financial risk across a global portfolio, and some have deep market knowledge. The whole key is to match the risk to the partner who's best equipped to deal with it. Let's make this super concrete. Take a local partner. Their ability to influence local regulators and stakeholders, it's incredibly high, but their ability to diversify financial risk, pretty low because they're tied to that one economy. Now, a global portfolio investor is the complete opposite. They can diversify risk like nobody's business, but they have almost zero ability to influence what's happening on the ground. See the insight? You give the political risk to the local partner and the financial market risk to the global investor. That's just smart strategy. We have covered a ton of ground here, right? We've gone from an old, passive way of looking at risk to a dynamic, strategic framework. So let's bring it all home and talk about what it truly means to be a risk strategist.
I really want you to take this quote in, because it perfectly captures the spirit of this entire approach. Success doesn't come from finding some perfect project that's ready to go on day one. It comes from taking a promising idea and then actively, relentlessly shaping it by negotiating with partners, influencing regulators, and strategically allocating risk until you've turned a possibility into a reality.
So let's just do a quick recap of the biggest takeaways. First, stop just calculating risk and start strategizing about it. Second, map your risks. Know if they're technical, market, or institutional. Third, use the 4 core strategies: shape, shift, diversify, and embrace. Fourth, always allocate risk to the partner with the comparative advantage. And finally, and most importantly, remember that your job is to actively shape your project's outcome.
And that leaves us with one last thought for you to take away. When you look at your own work, are you simply managing risk as a number that's been handed to you? Or are you taking control, using these strategies to actively shape the future and forge your project's destiny? The choice and the opportunity is all yours.